On Insightful Inspiration, Isabelle Landreville chats with a mosaic of brilliant individuals that help shape the insights industry. We live stream episodes to LinkedIn, and you can listen on all major podcast networks. Join us, and please subscribe so you won't miss our guests' insightful inspiration and hear what drives them and how they get inspired to be successful in the insights industry and beyond. Insightful Inspiration is brought to you by Sylvester & Co., an award-winning qualitative research firm with half a century of experience.
Welcome back to Insightful Inspiration, where we spotlight bold thinkers shaping the future of insights. I'm your host, Isabelle Landreville. Very excited to be here. As you know, I'm the proud owner of Sylvester & Co. And today I'm joined by a dear friend. We sit together and reinvent the world all the time. So it just felt natural to invite him. So Jon Crowley, head of strategy at Fuse Create, is joining us today. His career in strategy spans accounts as large as Rogers and Home Depot. He also helped shape consumer perception at McDonald's through his work on McCafé. Appropriately, insights are the spark that light the fuse for Jon. They're what drives his team's pitches. They play a key role in the creative process. But for many ad agencies, insights are seen also as a gatekeeper. There's not a lot of safety in insights sometimes, but because they often kind of come across as the final judgment for concepts. So how does Jon actually utilize insights differently? Well, that's what we'll find out in our conversation with him today. So I always leave I feel like I'm reinventing the world. We might today, you never know, but we'll try to keep it on target and also keep it on time. So Jon, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I think knowing us keeping it on time is going to be the challenging part.
I don't think we've ever sat somewhere and started a conversation and left. I never book a meeting after, essentially. That's kind of what I've learned over the years. I'm like, we sit somewhere and we're like, oh, we have half an hour, and then 2.5 hours later, we're like, oh, someone's looking for me. I should reemerge into my real world. I feel like that's usually how it goes.
Oh yeah, I'm going to take that as a compliment though. I love having a great conversation and we always manage to do it.
I think so. And I'm so happy you have that background. I love, love, love that. I'm so expecting it, so wishing for it this morning.
It is the number one source of conversations with people who meet me for the first time. I sit in front of my sneaker collection. Largely because my lovely wife told me when we moved into this house that I could have a room for my office or a room for my sneakers, but having both would be insane. It does spark some really great questions from people who are meeting me for the first time. I think the best one I ever got was, does it smell in there? And I had to explain that no, I take excellent care of my shoes. When you only wear a pair once in a while, they never really get funky. So I want you all to understand that this is a beautiful space to be in and very enjoyable.
I mean, you'd never dare asking that of a girl with her Manolos or something. I think it's that sneaker aspect. I'm like, they're the same. My Manolos, my Prada shoes, yours. I think they're the same.
I'm betting, I can't say for sure, but I'm betting the person who asked me that had a teenage boy at home and is used to the one pair of sneakers being the only pair of sneakers that ever knew.
I can relate to that. Yeah, I can relate to that. Ugh. It's when they invite friends over. I think your boy is fine. I think it's the other. Anyways, off topic. Here we go. This is what. Okay, so I love stories. You like telling stories. I mean, let's start with that. Can you tell me a story when an insight has really sparked something, has really inspired you in your work?
One of my favorite stories of an insight really cracking a problem open and really changing conversation was a few years ago when I was working with the Toronto Zoo.
Okay.
And the interesting thing about working with the Toronto Zoo is at the time I was in my early 40s. And well, I'm still in my early 40s because it was recent. But I hadn't actually been to the zoo since I was a teenager. My son was too young for it really to be a great activity for him. And so I had this memory of what the space was about and what it was for. And it was kind of categorized in my head as an entertainment option, a thing you do that was very family friendly. It was a little educational, but fundamentally an entertainment thing. And the more I engaged with the people who work at the zoo, the leadership there, the people who handle the marketing and programming, it became really clear that I had a really common misconception that you meet the people who work in an accredited modern zoo, and they are conservationists. They are animal lovers. They are people who are concerned about reintroducing animals back into the wild. They're concerned about habitat destruction. They're concerned about the way individual consumption can have a negative impact on these things. And it was so fascinating working with them. Because on one hand, you have this group of people that's so passionate about wildlife and animals. And on the other end of the table, their biggest detractors are people who are passionate about wildlife and animals. And so we were trying to get to the root of that, and what we kind of discovered based on some consumer research, based on some individual conversations, and candidly based on one of the people I worked with at the time was a wildlife photographer. And so this is a deep passion of theirs. And what kind of came to the fore is when people thought about zoos, people thought about them in the same category as like an old-timey circus where you'd have an elephant, or in a very like Ontario-centric example, like Marineland, where you'd have you'd have like large animals in captivity. And what kind of hit us, the big like takeaway that unlocked everything for us, was the central insight that the core of the problem was basically that you had the people who should love you hating you and the people who should hate you loving you, because no one understands what you actually stand for. We ended up framing that as this idea that the challenge is people think a zoo is for seeing animals, but really a modern zoo is a machine for conservation. It's there to save animals. And that actually led to a repositioning, kind of a reframing of the way the zoo was talking about itself. It culminated in a campaign called Guardians of Wild. And this was, you would see it on the shirt of everyone in the zoo. You'd see it in the boards when they were sharing information about the animals that were there. But the power of that insight in terms of getting the entire team at the zoo on board with the idea that promotion and marketing wasn't just about making them more popular, it was about making them understood and unlocking audiences and supporters that they might not have had already. That was really powerful on their end. And it was really exciting for me. It's something I'm really proud to have gotten to be a part of.
That's awesome. When you say there's something about it really unlocked it for us, is it a feeling like when we say, we always say the definition of an insight, it's like a feeling. It's like no one can really come up with a real kind of valid, well, yes and no, but a lot of it comes back with a feeling. But when you say it really unlocked it for us, is it rational? Is it gut? Is it emotion? Is it all of it?
Ooh, I love that question. A thing I've been thinking about a lot recently is that you'll have a lot of people that are like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like psychological researchers, people who work in neuroscience. They'll come back with the point that a lot of the decision making we do as people is instinctual. It's emotion driven. It's not super rational. But the value that rationality provides in these situations is it makes your feeling feel less like a feeling and feel more real and concrete. Like when I know I found a good insight when it explains a feeling people didn't like talking about because they couldn't explain it before. Or it takes something that was an unresolved discomfort and allows someone to resolve it in a way that makes it addressable, makes it conversational, makes it actionable. Because a lot of the time, we can't even really articulate what our problems are as individuals, but also as businesses, as organizations. We have trouble actually saying this is the actual problem we're trying to solve.
Yeah.
The example I always use is that, if I was working for a ketchup company, they might give me a brief that says we need to sell 20% more ketchup. That's not actually a problem. That's an objective. Their problem might be that someone is buying the other ketchup. But that's still why. Why are people buying that ketchup? Why aren't they buying yours? What's the actual barrier there? Very often, the thing that people forget is that an insight can actually tell you what problem you need to solve in order to get the outcome you want. And we have a tendency to confuse outcomes and problems.
Yeah. And I think there's something about, doesn't it like you said, it's interesting how you said like the people internally felt understood. There's something also that, like I always ask people when we start a project or when I'm like, what's the decision that you need? How does this need to land? How do you like to learn or want to learn about this? What's the decision? Like the classic ones. And then my favorite one, which is how can I make you look good? But then there's also this notion of, I had a few meetings last week and someone said, I'll know it when I see it. Which I thought, I'm like, oh, that's an interesting one. And I I cannot not hear that. It was a first in 25 years. I'm like, oh, that's a new one. I like it. I like new challenges. But there's some truth to it though, based on what, like this notion of I can't really articulate the problem, can't really articulate, therefore the marketing job to be done. But then I'll know it but I think that's what an insight is. It shifts the room, it shifts the thinking, but it's also putting words that kind of make your feeling feel logical. Like whenever I debrief something, I know it lands if people go, yeah, that makes sense. That tracks. I would have never put it that way, or I never looked at it that way or considered it that way, but it tracks because then they connect dots and they make a face usually.
Totally. And I think there's a really interesting tension between like that. There's one kind of I know it when I'll see it, where it's less like if someone says I know it when I see it when they're learning or researching or exploring something, that's fun and exciting. When someone says I know it when I'll see it when they're judging an output, can sometimes be really stressful.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting tension there though, because like you want someone open enough to the idea that they might learn something that changes the way they look at the problem. Like I often think of an insight as a lens for viewing a situation or a business or an issue. And often there's more than one. There's a lot of different lenses you could use to determine what you're actually looking at and what lever you need to pull or what thing you need to do to get the output you want.
Yeah.
Where it can get challenging is sometimes I find, and I don't know if you find the same thing, but that people think that there's going to be one insight and that it is going to be immediately clear to everyone that this is the insight, and then everything is going to pivot around that one moment. And I love that moment when you'll have 2 or 3 different audiences, and each of them will lean in a different direction based on what they're hearing or what they're saying, and then you need to try to figure out how to bring those pieces together.
Yeah. Is it the insight, or is it how you convey that insight?
That is definitely part of the problem. It's definitely part of the opportunity and part of the problem.
Yeah. And part of the skill that sort of separates the good from the great from the good, maybe?
Definitely. I completely agree with that. I think when someone can express an idea in its like most concise and clear way, people who might have seen like the page-long version of it will actually internalize it. They'll get it. They'll open up to the idea that this is something that's going to shape the way they're going to work. Whereas sometimes, and this is true of a lot of types of academic research too, something can be obviously true and expressed so poorly that you're still closed to it.
Yeah. Or like there's this age-old story that Gail Livermore actually brought it up in a MRIA sort of conference. So this is dating me and poor Gail. But we're still very young, but we're the same age. Saying that. But all to say, she had this age-old story, which is you have to cater to the audience. This notion that you've probably heard this story. I'm not going to tell it properly, but there's this notion that when surgeons started operating on people, their whole motive was to save people. And it wasn't panning out because they were still learning. And so they sort of enlisted the help of a researcher to actually research how they were doing things. And he came back saying, well, his insight was that you're probably not washing your hands. You've got probably blood from another patient. Like but basically his headline was, you are the problem. And the surgeons went, well, no. So the wall went up and they completely disengaged and they got really defensive and he couldn't get another word in. So I'm like, I think there's also this notion of how do you learn? How do you cater to audience? What's the angle and the story to actually get? So I don't know if the insight changes depending on who you're speaking to, but maybe how you get there. And like, are you using M&Ms for them to follow you, or are you using something else, you know?
There definitely is a right approach for a right person factor here, where it's like you need to make sure that you're speaking to people in a way they can listen to. But it's also, it can get really interesting in situations like that, where like the exact same framing could have been, there's too much on your plate, and if you had a checklist to run from, it would be less intellectual burden for you, so you could focus on the very important work you do. And everyone would have agreed with that, even though it was the same issue of you're not washing your hands, you're not doing every step that
Yeah.
you're supposed to.
Yeah, fair enough. So at Agency World, we've worked together, we've collaborated together. I've also qualitative research plays a role at different levels, at different gateways. Has the role of insights changed though in the ad agency ecosystem in the recent years?
I think it's kind of always changing, and often in response to what the other sources of input are. Because there was a huge shift through the first part of my career in the late 2000s, 2010s, where everyone had more data than they'd had in the past. And so qualitative research needed to be presented in a way that didn't make it the enemy of data, but also to audiences that thought truth had a statistic attached to it. But by which I mean, like, there's a certain school of thought where you need a percentage on every point or every slide to prove that it's true. And I often make the joke that, like, it is not necessary for me to cite a source that the sky is blue, like that I should be able to just say that and we can move on. But now we've added a really interesting layer, because people are now accepting statements with no direct evidence other than I asked an AI. Which is a thing I find fascinating, because people who, like, the exact people who 5 years ago would not have accepted an observation that didn't have a citation are now saying, you know, my research is I asked ChatGPT and it says this is true. And so you're getting a really interesting, like, faith is kind of being reinserted into the process, when before it was kind of a mindset of, like, you know, you need to bring proof or I cannot trust you.
Yeah.
Now it's a mindset of certain things are too complex to explain in a way that has direct citations, but I have a certain faith in the truthiness of them. And so finding a way to navigate that's really interesting. But it is, oddly enough, opening people up more to the idea of the evidence of their own eyes and ears. The idea that if you see something and you know it really happened, maybe you can trust that it has meaning.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. It's interesting how it evolves too, because I'm like, the trust without checking the facts. I think it's also, you got to make sure like people who are sharing insights need to do a bit more, still need to do their due diligence. I think it's, you don't have to, I don't think there's an expectation of as much transparency, or is there a need and a time for it? But I think you still have to do it. Otherwise, you know, you're not going to help anybody at the end of the day if you're not doing it properly. So I think it's on us to sort of bring that rigor and still do the work properly. But no one's asking for it anymore. Like as a qualitative researcher, there was this age old joke, which is we didn't have numbers. And so at one point, and if we had numbers, it was like 24 or like 52, like it wasn't big numbers. And so we'd skip the research design thing and then get into the story of it and tell the story and sort of that emotion aspect. And at one point, I do remember in debriefs, I'm like, okay, people, you haven't heard a number in a while. Let me tell you. And then I pull up my iPhone. I tell them the temperature and the weather outside. I'm like, it's 32 degrees outside or something. I'm like, oh, doesn't that feel better? You've heard a number. Like it was, and it's just it's how you deliver it. Of course, I wasn't being weird about it like I am right now. But because they needed a number, to your point. But then it served now. I haven't had the need to do this. The room doesn't need it anymore. That joke has died a good death. But over the years, but then I also now have conversation where you have someone who's telling you the story of like, this is what happened to me. I was there. This is the show, the event, whatever. And then you have someone younger fact checking on their phone. And sort of going to social media to see if they have a TikTok, a video, a something, a Snapchat, something that can sort of prove what they're saying. And I'm like, can't you just, like, they were there. I'm like, can't you just, like, it's interesting how, and then if TikTok says it, it must be true. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting how it's evolving. The trust is transferring or evolving.
I completely agree. And it's the thing I always say is that, like, when I'm talking to my team, when I'm talking about the work we do, I kind of talk to them about needing to do enough homework that if challenged, you can defend it.
Yep.
But I also try to remind them that very often the challenge is actually just a sign that someone doesn't believe you or doesn't agree with you.
Mm.
If you are saying something to someone that they believe or agree with, they are much less likely to ask you to show your work. That what they want is the answer, and if you give them an answer they can believe in, generally they'll take your word for it.
Yeah.
Where you get that real tension and that need for evidence is when you're telling someone a truth they don't want to hear, which in my mind is actually a big role of both qualitative research, insights, and strategy. It's kind of presenting people with realities that they may not want to engage with, and then helping them engage with them in a productive way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's never bad news. I'll never leave you hanging. There's always a silver lining. Otherwise, the wall goes up again.
Yeah, totally. That
Yeah.
that wall is such a central enemy of really great insights work because in my experience, great insights are seldom convenient.
What
Like
makes you
even
say that? I think that's really interesting. I like that.
I think it's a lot easier for people to arrive on their own at conclusions that are welcome, conclusions that make them feel good, that make them feel heard and understood. Like the zoo example I used earlier, it was actually really tough for the people who work there to hear that people think you're marine land, because they saw themselves as the exact opposite of that. They walked me through their state-of-the-art facility dedicated at like animal and like veterinary care and emergency surgeries and all the things these wild animals may need. And they thought to themselves, how could someone think we are these people?
Mm-hmm.
But by understanding that was the challenge they were facing, suddenly they had infinitely more permission to tell their conservation story because it wasn't self-serving, it was existential.
Mm.
And that framing is so important because very often the great opportunity hides behind kind of an ugly realization.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't really fix things until you can name them, even if they're uncomfortable.
Yeah. So I think you need great insights, but you need the proper framing to make sure that they land properly is kind of
100%.
Yeah.
100%. I think inevitably you can only force so many people to eat their vegetables. But a lot of people will happily eat a well-cooked, healthy, balanced meal. Like if you can make someone like stir-fried beef and broccoli, they're going to eat it. If you bring them steamed broccoli and they're not a broccoli person, they might push back.
Fair. So the framing is as important as the insight. Otherwise, what's the point of the insight? It's just not going to land.
I think so. I think a reality in a lot of the work we do is that you have to be a weird person to pursue truth. Like you have to be a little bit weird to dedicate your time to like, I'm going to find out the truth behind this thing, rather than I'm going to pick an answer and go with it, or I'm just going to agree with what everyone says, or I'm going to use common sense and just decide it doesn't require investigation.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that has served me really well in my entire career is operating under the frame that I'm the weird one in this conversation, and that I need to make the weird thing I'm thinking or I'm excited about as exciting and palatable for you, normal person, as it is for me, the weirdo who really just enjoys learning about this stuff.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And it also probably serves you really well because in a conversation, you can lean into that brand probably and ask weird questions. Like I would say, I strongly believe that you can ask anything to anyone. It's just a matter of how.
Oh, 100%.
But then, but then I don't have an off switch. So you might be like me, but I don't have an off switch, or I lose sight of the off switch sometimes. And so I will always be in researcher mode, but sometimes in my real life. And so I will ask a question that socially you might have, well, you know what? They're not a participant. Like it's going to hurt them a bit. Maybe you should have not like asked that question. Yeah. So sometimes like my inner circle, they're like, yeah, you need to find the off switch, babe, tonight. I'm like, okay, I'll find it. But I think, there is something quirky about most of us.
Well, I think most people are just not interested in most things. And that's like the normal mode of operation. And I find people who do work like your work or work like my work find everything interesting in some way. Like no matter what the topic is, there is something of interest that lives within it, and you can dig and find the thing that's neat.
Yeah. like festival season is in full blown sort of
Mhm.
downtown Montreal, and our like I'm sitting at my desk in Montreal right now, and so I'm smack in the middle of Montreal and sort of festival, sort of central, and I just love watching people because I'm like, look at how they're dressed. Like clearly, there's a story. The
Mhm.
guy has like I saw this guy. He had like a vintage tee with like a flower on it, like a flower brooch. And then like Montreal was super eclectic, really amazing. And I'm like just sitting there, and my friends are holding me back from like walking to him saying, can you tell me more about how you sort of build this look? Because I love this. I want to know the story about it. And they're like, you can't do that.
But I mean, that framing is perfect, though. Like, the person who has that eclectic outfit would love to talk about it if approached with the right energy and in the right.
Probably. Sure.
Your friends just don't want to be half an hour late for whatever you guys had planned.
Yeah, or they don't, or they, yeah, probably. Probably. I'm like sitting between them and their rosé or something. There's probably something there. So have you found that all of this has changed where you look for insights or how you sort of uncover, like your sources or maybe how you go about it? Like less people, more niche, like you tell me.
I've always been big on correlation
Okay.
as a way of like figuring out when something is relevant. So, by that I mean like having 3 or 4 or 5 things that are interesting and then trying to figure out how they fit together.
Mm.
And so for me, having a really broad net of inputs is really important. Having a really broad like set of things that I could be thinking about at a time, but usually those identify questions that eventually I can't answer. And that for me, I find is when I get to an insight, when I have. So F. Scott Fitzgerald had this really great quote forever ago about. I'm going to mangle it, but it was defining intelligence as the ability to hold 2 contradictory ideas in your head at the same time.
Mm.
And I feel like very often that's where insights live. It's when you have 2 things that are inarguably correct, but at odds, and then you need to square that circle.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
sometimes you find the things that are at odds by using really like traditional desk research methods, or honestly, a lot of quantitative research is fantastic for actually just identifying things that seem like contradictions on their surface.
Mm.
And where I find such value in sitting and talking with people or observing a focus group is watching the mental gymnastics people do to explain them to themselves why those contradictions are okay. That to me is when you find something really intriguing, and it's often those inconvenient truths I was talking about that explain why people do this thing, or why they don't do the other thing, or why they make the choice they make.
Yeah.
So that's lots of like finding everything I can. The internet has made us lazy in a very helpful way, in that you can find a huge amount of opinions from a very vocal minority of people. But like I love well-sourced quantitative data. I love taking qualitative data and either finding something interesting in an insights report, in a conversation that came out of some qual, and then using that to contrast or correlate with something that I'm seeing in quantitative data, and then trying to find examples of people expressing that in the wild in digital settings, and bring it all together into kind of a passable theory for why this is a meaningful lens to look at a problem with.
Yeah. I think you have to engineer tension, not create tension like artificially, but I think in your research amongst your sources, or even within like a shared learning journey at our place or research design, you do have to like intentionally create tension. Like, you do lovers so that they declare their love. You do, like, I love talking to switchers because to your point, you're like, you do this sometimes and you do this. They're probably the most able to rationalize, whether that be right or not, or the most self-aware. I think it's really, so it could be either or, to be quite honest, in my opinion.
That is so on point. And the craziest thing is you'll see the same behavior, but for one of them it will be complete self-awareness and just saying, I do this for this reason and that's why I go back and forth.
Yeah.
And for the other, it will be a Russian nesting doll of rationalizations that make it all hang together without admitting that it's contradictory.
Like, I love someone a switcher that goes, well, it depends. And I'm like, oh, Let's unpack that. Oh, I'm really like, I wouldn't say that because I hide my enthusiasm, but I really like someone who goes, well, it depends. I'm like, oh, and then you go, okay, the last time you did that, what was the story? The last time you did that, what was the story? And you're like, oh, but then sometimes, have you ever connected dots that should not be connected? I know I've asked you this before because this is something sometimes I have been known to do. But
This is personally and professionally would be my answer. Sometimes I'm having a conversation with someone and I point out a linkage in behaviors, and then that friendship might get awkward for a week or two as we kind of slowly work through the thing I just did to that person I like. Sometimes a little bit of unexpected self-awareness can be really confusing.
yeah,
Sometimes it can be great. It can be revelatory. It can be motivational. It can make you feel really good about yourself when someone sees something great in you that you don't necessarily see. But when someone like points out, the best way I can put it is it's the behavioral equivalent of like pointing out that someone has something in their teeth, except they can't get it out very quickly.
yeah.
And so they're just kind of sitting there knowing you see that there's something in their teeth, wishing that this would end so they can go floss.
Yeah.
Bit of a tortured metaphor, but I think you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's like the equivalent of I'm coming to you and I just want you to listen and you're problem solving. Kind of that age old kind of like we're not on the same planet here. We're not having the same conversation. Yeah, there's a bit of that. Yeah. So tell me because insights can play different roles across the creative process.
Totally.
So let's unpack that a bit. What role, if any, do insights play in an ad agency winning work?
Ooh, so a big thing, and this is actually something that's played out really nicely for us recently, is people often make the mistake that in new business, the insight your client wants is something revelatory or revolutionary. And they might like that. But I find the thing they gravitate to first and foremost is something that indicates you've actually developed a deep understanding of the place they operate in. Because there's a surface level understanding of something has never been cheaper. You can open up whatever tool you want and type in, I need a summary of what's happening in this specific vertical or industry.
Yeah.
You'll get it back in 45 seconds, and it'll be mostly right and relatively detailed. If you can get to the second or third order effects that either cause or come from the realities of that current situation, and you can walk into a room with clients and speak about them intelligently, they are much more likely to believe you can actually help them with their problems. And a thing a lot of agencies struggle with is they're so interested in coming in and being contrary to a certain extent. Like, we're going to think about your entire vertical and business completely differently, and you're not in this business, you're in that business. And that works when you happen to have the person who's come to a similar conclusion, or the person who really craves disruption but doesn't necessarily know where to go. A lot of the time, people are looking for a partner to go on a journey with, and they want to feel understood. And so a solid understanding kind of demonstrated through deep insight into their business or their industry or their vertical can be hugely valuable. And then the other thing, as I said, is that it's that second or third order effect where you've gotten somewhere non-obvious. You've thought about it enough that you are bringing something to the table that they've not heard before, but not necessarily throwing out their potential decades of combined experience in this very specific space you've been studying for 2 weeks.
Yeah, fair enough. There is a respect for their expertise up to some point as well, and the humble sort of, tiptoe into it. I feel like it's easier for us to do our job these days, but it's also more challenging because, well, you're probably the same as me. I've secretly raised the bar probably tenfold for myself and my team as a result, though.
I think it's possible to do more and deeper work today than I would have done for 3 or 5 times the budget 10 years ago. And there are techniques and thought experiments and research options that were just not fiscally feasible not that long ago that now you can just do every time. And like talking about like AI and use of AI, I was actually having a conversation in our office with kind of the working group that we have working on kind of evolving some of our approaches. And one of the takeaways was the idea that like we've actually removed the excuse to not do it right in a lot of ways. And before, time pressure or cost pressure was a reality, but that reality meant you would not dig all the way to the bottom of the rabbit hole from a research perspective. You wouldn't necessarily document every single thing everyone said. Maybe you wouldn't make a full transcript of the entire 20-person conversation and then directly compare the language use in each one. You'd read everything quickly and you'd say, here we go, this is what we could do, because there's a limited amount of person power you could put on it.
Yeah.
As that becomes lighter, I find I'm spending the same amount of time. I'm probably doing 5 or 10 times as much, and I'm getting to a much deeper place because I'm able to dot all the I's and cross all the T's and do the what used to be the prohibitively labor expensive version of the work I do in a reasonable timeline at a reasonable cost for my clients.
And I think there's also the fact that I feel like the cost is different. My thinking is so much better. I'm safeguarding my thinking time, my process time, but also probably because we haven't lost sight of what good work is. We haven't lowered. I'm not just getting it done.
Yeah.
I'm raising the bar, expecting more of myself. So I don't think I'm doing this. There's cost efficiency. It's like, oh, let's include this audience, or let's do this, or like I'm experimenting. I've had quite a few market research tech companies that do AI moderating and whatnot in different ways, shape, or forms reach out for me to sample their stuff and trial stuff. So I'm doing a few trials and I have been doing a few trials, which are really enlightening and really interesting. But I think it's also like something that you can, we can also talk to these people. Oh, we can also include that. Like you get your 360 degree so much better, so much faster. You don't have blind spots as much, but I think you still have to safeguard your thinking time, but then everything else comes to you much faster. So I think it speeds up things or it completes things. So you get more out of it. Yeah.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. The thing I find really interesting is initially my thought was I'm going to be so much more efficient and I'm going to have so much more thinking time and that's going to be awesome. What I've found is the amount of things I need to read and interrogate and internalize and fact check is eating up a nice amount of that thinking time. So I do have more thinking time, but I also have more to think about. And so the outcome is deeper and richer work. But it's funny because I think like at the outset of all of this recent technological explosion, the big thought I had was some people are going to go all the way into efficiency and some people are going to go all the way into value. And that's going to be the K-shape of this industry, similar to the K-shape of our overall economy. What I've found is even when you think you're going into efficiency, the volume of stuff you're creating to interpret may not be creating the efficiencies you thought you were going to make.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, unless you stick to the same, I think it's because we're raising the bar. If we weren't raising the bar and weren't like, oh, I can also do this. Or I can I can perfect this. If we weren't raising the bar, I think it'd be different.
That's fair.
Because I think there's a democratization that's happening that is also very exciting. It's like, I always compare it to like AI and sort of insights in AI moderating and whatnot. I always compare it to like the music industry. Like everybody can record a song now or an album and sort of do in their own basement or house or space and promote it themselves. They don't need to have a record deal, record label. They don't like it's much easier to access. So I think insights are now available to so many more people. But I think it's also on us to raise the bar and make sure that, there's also this, but you can also do this and expect more. So I think it depends how you go about it.
I think building on your metaphor, because I think it's actually a really good one, but similar to the music industry, the volume of competition, because anyone can do this at a certain level, has skyrocketed. But I feel that like the need to raise the bar is so essential because the average quality is dropping. And the problem is when the average quality of anything drops, you actually need to be exceptional to prove to people that you're good. Like if there's 10 people doing something and 5 of them are good and 5 of them are bad, it's really not
Yeah.
that complicated. But if the average is complete garbage, you really need to drive home that what you're doing is something based on expertise and history and an understanding that goes deeper than what someone can get generated for them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. I think there's something there. Listen, I was at a conference recently, and going back to sort of this notion of a lot of the qual for creative agencies also comes in this notion of, we have 3 concepts. This is the brief. Let's, figure out sort of what's the potential in this. Let's assess this for ownability and resonance and blah, 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 and all of that. We've been there together. You've been there before. You will still be there. I think there's something interesting about sort of how can, like to pick your brain, how can a qualitative researcher, a researcher, create that sense of safety so that the ad agency can see value in it? And I'm kind of preaching to the choir because I know you see value in it, but how do we create that safety so that
I think
people are clear that we're not working against them?
So I think
yeah.
So this is a tortured metaphor. Apparently, I really like tortured metaphors today.
It's the tension. It's the tension.
The thing that jumps out for me, about this is that sometimes I feel as though when you do testing work, whether it be quantitative or qualitative, we do it in a way that doesn't actually make a ton of sense.
Oh.
But by which I mean, I think some of this work is done in a way, and like when you and I have done this, it hasn't been done in this way, but some of this work is done in a way where it's the equivalent of like a restaurant reviewer being invited into the kitchen of a restaurant 2 hours before opening to taste the prep and then use that to decide whether or not the meal is good. And I think there's huge value in qualitative research in terms of actually understanding who your customer is and what they feel about your product and your category and the universe around it, and actually ensure you have solid insights to build from. And I think there's huge value in when you actually have a thing that is somewhat fully formed and crafted and like ready for people to understand, actually really going deep on what people understand about it and what they take away from it. There's this weird mushy middle that I've been trapped in a lot of times where we're going to show some rough storyboards and read you a script and maybe hack together an animatic. And then we're going to evaluate the quality of this idea based on a layperson's opinion of it in this very unfinished state. And I think that's where that's where the walls go up from a creative perspective, because it's kind of like expecting a musician to go on stage and perform in front of 10,000 people a song that they wrote that morning. Like they want to get it right, and the craft actually matters in terms of understanding the substance and ensuring it's packaged properly, and that the rough edges have been sanded off. It's actually kind of key in terms of determining how it's going to be perceived. And I feel as though there are enough creative people and enough creative agencies in this industry that have had that experience of needing to find a way to defend work that is being judged without being understood, or even people like understanding where it's trying to go, that they have an immediate negative response to research. But the thing that's turned that around in the past for me is working with people that are willing to set the stage really clearly, not just for participants in research, but also for the viewers of research. And to drive home to, whether it be agency people or client people sitting behind that two-way pane of glass. One way, I suppose, two-way glass would be regular glass. Sitting behind the one-way mirror.
Yeah. Eating bonbons. Yeah,
eating bonbons.
Potentially drinking scotch because it's bad news. Yeah.
It's like, this isn't actually bad news. This is response to themes. We're not actually showing them a creative idea. A creative idea is a thing that's really difficult to explain to this individual person that doesn't have expertise in this space. Like one of the things that's most fascinating for me is that everyone I have ever met who works in a creative agency has talked about the difficulty of explaining ideas to professional marketers who just do marketing all year round.
Yeah.
And yet very often they've seen things they were really passionate about kind of get torn to shreds by people who have substantially less understanding of what it is they're looking at and what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to me, that means like the value of deep research is about either seeing how people respond to the thing you want them to respond to, or ensuring you understand the people you want to elicit a response from.
So if it was only up to us, Jon, how would we go about it? Is it a stim thing? Is it a framing thing? I've tested creative in so many different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Good about depending on the objective, whatnot. But if it was only up to us, what would be like the best way?
In a perfect world,
Yeah.
In a perfect world, I would take the budget used for research and I'd just put it in two places.
Okay.
I'd take it from the middle of the process where it often kind of lives, and I'd move it to the beginning and the end. And in the beginning, I would start with actually understanding and validating, do we have an insight that resonates with audiences?
Great.
And not resonates necessarily in a good way, but is the thing we're basing this whole thing on true and relevant, and does it elicit a response? And honestly, even if it elicits a negative response, that tells us that there's something here and it's worth pressing on this specific nerve.
Yeah.
And then once we've actually got a thing in a shape where we wouldn't be ashamed to show it to a consumer, let's show it to actual consumers and see what they think and how they feel and what their response is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The challenge is like things end up where they end up because people don't want to feel like they're handing off too much of the decision, but they also don't want to spend too much money before they validate whether or not they're happy with what's gone on.
And and I always say it's a luxury to be able to test the brief and the elements of the brief separately than the executions or the campaigns or the territories. There is something about because it's always and we've worked together before, but there's always this, if you've heard me say this before, and even when I do the research, there's something about, is it a brief issue? Or is it how it was featured? Or is it something in the ad that actually, or in the concept? Is it I'm trying to, it's interesting how it is probably, I've trained a lot of people in my career doing creative assessment well, because we're testing the brief and probably the one thing that takes the longest time to sort of train people on and coach researchers on, surprisingly.
Especially because very often you're kind of asking people you're going to show them something that looks kind of like an ad. They know that this is a conversation about advertising. You're going to tell them 7 times this is not actually an ad though.
Mm-hmm.
And then once they come back and tell you, so I don't like this ad because, you need to find a gentle way to tell them that they're wrong and it's not an ad and you're asking for other inputs. I have seen you do this very well. Most people do not have the skill set to be able to do that in a way that keeps people on side.
True. Okay. Yeah. And I think there's some, I've heard someone say, I've heard this poor ad agency person reading, doing the audio. I always have so much empathy for the person who needs to read the scripts. I'm like, oh my God. I used to do it because I've been doing that. I used to rewind tapes. I've done multiple kind of iteration. We even did storyboards with AI now and so forth. But I've always had so much empathy because there was one concept at one point where it was something that was sour. And in the script, there was someone that was taking a bite and sort of making that sound of when it's sour. Mm-hmm. And we were testing 3 because you go in with 3 or you go in with 2 to create that tension and blah, 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 and all that. And that concept just died a good death. If you just took the feedback at face value, because that poor agency person did a bit too well.
Too juicy?
Well, no, just a bit too well in the sense that people think, oh, that's too sour. I don't want to try that.
It's
so motivational power just went down. And I was like, no, this poor person at the end who just is not, not, trying to be an actress in any way, shape, or form. But yeah,
this is the McLuhan of it all, though. It's very much the medium is the message with a lot of these things. And if we're delivering rough, unfinished versions of ideas to be tested, you're going to get rough, unfinished feedback. And people don't always internalize that. They're not always ready to look at it that way.
Yeah. And I think it's not what they say, it's what they mean. And that is a real thing. It's not about creating a bias. It's not putting words in people's mouth. There is what they say and what that means. It's not the same thing all the time.
Completely agreed. I think the grand challenge is if the wrong person hears the wrong thing from one person in a set of 8 focus groups,
Yeah.
that can literally be the next year of that client relationship.
Yeah.
Can be someone pulling up the one thing that someone said that really rubbed them the wrong way.
Yeah.
And that the thing is, you either need to risk that or you need to be so defined by caution that you end up not doing anything great anyways.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's where a personal brand and trust and sort of empathy and being able to frame it and how you frame it in the back room, how you frame it with as a learning opportunity. I always say stretch. And I always say fail with me, because if you fail with me, you've created those growth opportunities for yourself and you've tested the waters and stretched your thinking so much that in the real world, you won't.
I like that.
Yeah, it's really, I'm like, fail with me. Please fail with me, because I'm going to soften the blow. Like, it doesn't matter if you fail with me when you think about it. It doesn't matter. This is the place to fail. This is
I was
the
actually
place for like
saying,
someone to say, no, that's not going to work. And let's unpack why. And maybe there's something there. Maybe you still move forward with it, but you slightly sort of tilt it. I don't know.
I was actually saying to someone on my team this week that like part of our job is to fail as many times as possible now where it's cheap and correctable so that we don't fail later when it's complicated and expensive.
Yeah.
And like sometimes that's actually the job. It's like we think we found something, we think it's really valuable. Now we have to test it and probably disprove it just to make sure that we don't make a larger problem down the road.
Yeah. And I think that is something that these days we're not as comfortable with as we used to be. I keep rereading sort of Adam Grant's book, Growth Mindset. I keep rereading it, parts of it. And my copy looks like at this point it's full of post-its and stuff, because I'm like, I keep quoting him. I'm also like raising a 16-year-old. I'm like, you got to learn how to fail, babe. It's important for your mental. It's important to success. It's the road to success. But
I'm in a very similar place with my 5-year-old, like leaning on the, we're going to be growth mindset people. We need to drive home like it's the learning and the doing and the progress that's the important part.
Oh, I miss 5. He was so cute at 5. I miss 5. Okay, so what? I mean, we're going off time here, but
typical us.
Typical us. Okay, a few more. What do you feel your industry needs more of moving forward?
I think in general, the advertising industry has leaned really hard into making things more complicated than they need to be. I think some honest simplicity would be really valuable.
What do you mean by that? I'm not sure I follow.
There's a lot of very complex proprietary models. There's a lot of data pulled in. There's a lot of what I see as overcomplication of some of the key asks they're going to make. The example I always use is like there's 1,000 ways to measure the efficacy and the performance of a campaign, but do any of them really matter that much more than impact on revenue? Like, do we need 5,000 numbers to figure out whether or not this worked, or can we see that it went out, people liked it, and you made money?
Yeah.
Or there's also some like interesting attribution math out in the world that I think is a little unnecessarily complicated. And the attribution fights we end up in seem more about fighting over who gets responsibility for a sale that was going to happen anyways. It's the example I always use is that, my son, who is 5, as I mentioned, is very convinced that the amount of Halloween candy he gets has something to do with how great his costume is. And not that
Which is so true, no?
not that he's out with a bag on Halloween. And like sometimes I see this attribution math in these case studies where it's like, no, you're a kid outside with a bag on Halloween. Like I don't know that this is based on your, agentic optimization strategy that you've picked up this leap in sales at the time when your product is most relevant.
And I mean, I grew up next to someone who owned a Sobeys and next to someone who owned like a convenience store. So, I mean, that factors in too. in terms of what they were giving away.
Completely. It's a
Yeah, you're right. There's multiple things at play always.
I try not to over apply Occam's razor, but like very often, if you've got relatively simple ways of knowing what's working and what isn't, and relatively simple theories for why things are happening, if you can validate them, that's often good enough to make good decisions.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I always say at the end of the day, we're just humans that are, trying to make other humans choose us and be happy. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff behind that getting in the way of that. And it is not that simple. I get it. But sometimes, you have to force yourself to make it that simple.
In my experience, few things are made much better by making them as complicated as you can make them.
Yeah. I'm getting too lazy for complicated too.
I think
I think I always was. I'm a systems girl. I'm like, if I can be paid to think and make friends, which I think I'm not very far from, to be quite honest, I think I'm the happiest person, like aspiring person who lunches. Like that's where I'm at.
So mild tangent, but
Sure.
Occam's razor gets quoted all the time. And it gets quoted as the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. What Occam actually said was something closer to do not multiply entities needlessly, which is better translated to make it as simple as you can make it, but no simpler. And no one remembers that part. Like if it needs to be complex, let it be complex, but cap it at the amount of simplicity that is possible, that is pursuable.
I think it goes back to like our idea that at the beginning of a conversation, which is the insight is really important, but how you frame it is equally important because that's what gets you buys and buy-in. And I think that's what it is. I mean, there's this fabulous word that I love, which is in French, which is vulgarisation. So it's not vulgar. That's not it at all. So don't go there. But it is this notion of if you truly understand something, you are able to bring it back down and level set to your audience. And I would say if you can't explain it to your mother-in-law for her to understand it, and I love my mother-in-law, it has nothing to do, like it doesn't say something about her. It could have been my niece or whatever. But if you can't like bring it back and explain it to, then probably you might not understand it enough yourself.
Yeah. This was Richard Feynman said something similar that like if you can't explain it to a fifth grader, you don't actually understand a concept. Yeah. And then later he tried to do that with string theory and had to admit he didn't understand string theory.
And I think that's fine. And I think that's fine. And I mean, have I walked into a debrief where I don't truly understand what I'm about to say? No, because then I can't own the content.
100%.
I can't frame it. I can't answer the question. I can't go off slide and just go, this is what you need to do if that's the decision you want. I can't be in the room and listen and guide and help if I don't fully understand what I'm supposed to be talking about. Yeah.
And like the thing that always gets repeated back to me is that the two things that people like the most is either someone who really understands something or someone who is willing to admit they don't understand something.
Which is fine.
Yeah, I was on a call with a client last week, and I actually, thanked them for letting us ask them a bunch of questions that were probably obvious to them, but that as people who aren't experts in their specific space, we wouldn't have background. And they actually thanked me, which was nice. Like, thank you for having the humility to just ask the questions instead of make up the answers.
Yeah, and I think that probably goes a longer stretch and actually building rapport, building trust, affinity, and whatnot. Which is ultimately how you want them to feel understood. Yeah, I always say if there's a brief, then, oh, please, let's have a chat. I'm like, I'm never just, what you're saying in like writing it down is probably not exactly, let's talk about it or something.
Definitely.
There. Yeah. Okay. So I always finish these podcasts with like a French twist because I come with a French twist. So I've cut it down to 3. So 3 core questions. I ask everyone the same questions. Apparently there's a few trends. So you'll have to keep your eyes peeled because the team has like the producing team has figured out a few things. So I'm curious to ask you, I like asking the same questions to different people. I think that's kind of interesting. Anywho, so tell me, what is your favorite word?
I think my favorite word is interesting.
I think you think your favorite word is interesting.
In terms of the word I use the most, it's definitely interesting.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
I think it's because like I get into a very specific problem where I will say something and it will be an observation, but people will take it as a value judgment in some way.
Oh, yes.
And like that's real strategist researcher behavior. That's actually like a thing that I think a lot of us share, is this idea that like you can observe something in a neutral way with no judgment. And I think interesting is the perfect word for that. Like literally this just attracts my interest. It's not necessarily good, it's not necessarily bad, it's just interesting.
But and I think it's a loaded word though in that way, because there's the Canadian interesting, right? Let's just leave it at
I see
that.
what you're saying. There are definitely some moments where I'm using that word in a positive way, some in a negative way, and some in a neutral way. And
I would love to see all the tones.
Interesting.
Love that. Okay. What is your least favorite word?
My least favorite word is probably consensus, which is interesting because I like the idea of consensus, but consensus has this real negative rap. Like I like it when people agree and get along and can make decisions together, but consensus always makes it sound like failure to me.
So consensus is compromise and not harmony for you?
I think it gets interpreted that way. And so I often pick another word whenever I can. Yeah. Because I want people to see like the positivity in people being on the same page and being aligned and agreeing and getting things done. Yeah. Whereas when you say consensus, sometimes people hear it and think compromise or sacrifice rather than alignment and togetherness and harmony.
There's no tension. There's nothing interesting in consensus either. So maybe there's something there.
Maybe.
Okay. I'm throwing your words back at you. Okay. This one is my favorite one. Because I always get something out of it. I think a lot of our listeners get something out of it too, which is, what is the best thing a mentor has told you that has stayed with you? Kind of those words are still haunting you in a good way.
So probably 15 years ago, maybe even longer than that, which is mildly terrifying. I worked at an agency out in Mississauga. And they brought in a consultant. The consultant was a woman named Margot J, who I didn't know particularly well, but she spoke to everyone in the company and we were talking about like change management and transformation and exciting things. She gave me the most valuable piece of advice I've gotten in my career that I've probably said to a few dozen people. She'd sat in on some meetings and she said, "Can I tell you something about yourself?" And immediately my back went up because I was like 25 and thought I was the smartest person in the world and had no humility yet. She said, "I've noticed a thing happens to you where you'll say something at the beginning of the meeting and everyone will disagree with you. And then the meeting will go on for an hour. And then at the end of the meeting, everyone will be saying the thing you said at the beginning of the meeting and you'll be in the corner looking furious." And I said, "Oh, that does seem to happen sometimes." She said, Can I help you with that?" And I said, "Sure." And she told me that your brain goes from A to Z. And so you get up and say Z at the beginning of the meeting, and no one knows what you're talking about, and you're frustrated with them. If you walk them from A to B to C to D and get all the way to Z, at the end of the meeting, everyone will be at Z, and everyone will be excited about Z, and then we can just do the thing, and no one needs to be frustrated.
So what did she tell you? So I had the kind of similar sort of thing happen to me, and this is why you and I bounce off each other the same way. But I was told, actually slow down and take people by the hand. That's my version of it. Do you succeed in doing it 15 years later?
I am much better at it. If I'm tired or overworked or stressed, I don't always remember.
Yeah.
But that sense of like you actually need to walk through how you got there if you want people to go there with you, was so simple and so completely beyond my level of self-awareness for me to figure out. And I if I'm being candid, I'd been hearing versions of that for my entire life, but that was the first time that actually stuck, where someone said, like, you need to walk through the chain of reasoning that got you to this recommendation or conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I think about it every time I sit down to write a presentation. I think about it when I write an outline or something. Sometimes I think about it when I'm chatting with a friend and I give them advice. It's like, I need to make sure to go the whole way from A to Z instead of just skipping to the end.
Yeah. Yeah. Or my segues aren't clear. If my brain's off and I'm like talking to friends or something and I'm like off, my segues aren't clear. People are like, how did you connect those two dots? I'm like, there's like 20 dots between that you kind of connected that we weren't a part of. I'm probably, there's probably other people like us because we're the same, but like I walk out of a fieldwork after moderating, I will write the executive summary, the recommendations, and then I'm done. Like writing a detailed deck for me and unpacking everything, I need help with. I need someone to sit there and sort of go through it and build the slides. Like I can build the story. I know how I got there. I can back it up. I can justify it. I remember the quotes, the people, blah, 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 and all of that, whether it be online or not. But yeah, after I've done the executive summary, I'm kind of done and I can move on to another project, surprisingly.
I have found that the actual process of going back and kind of getting from the beginning to the end often makes my end a lot tighter and sharper. And then I figure out what pieces I can cut out. And so going through that whole journey is like a really key part of my process right now. But I definitely often feel like I've already solved this. Can I go do the next thing? And so reminding myself that I need to actually do the work of explaining it in a way that's digestible and compelling is, that was a revelation for me, and it shows up every day.
Yeah. This notion of clearly that resonated.
We should start a support group or something.
For people that go from I think we go AZ, and then we should just go in the other direction. I think we go left. We should just go right. I think that's what it is.
That would work, actually.
I think that's what it is. We just go right to Z or Z or whatever. And then we should just go the opposite route. Yeah. It's
the thing that's very interesting was the realization that sometimes I land on the answer and I don't even know how I got there, and I need to go through the series of like, here's how I got there, rather than just like answer.
So have you read Blink?
Yes.
Yeah. That's what that is all about. Yeah. I read Blink and I'm like, oh, that's how my brain works. There you go. Yeah. Jon, it's been amazing. Always a pleasure. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I think people will get so much out of this, I'm sure. This is, I don't have favorite episodes, but I have favorite people. I think you're definitely one of them. Let's reinvent the world whenever we get a chance, my friend.
Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun, but we always have a great time whenever we chat.
Yeah.
And, I just really appreciate you bringing me on, us having the conversation, and getting the chance to share all of my crazy theories.
Of course, they're not crazy. So I have to say, though, because we started about the sneakers, we have to finish on the sneakers. And then how many sneakers? How many pairs?
I don't have an exact count anymore. It's somewhere north of 130 on these walls, and it actually extends onto this wall a little bit too. And there's about 16 still in boxes on the floor that I haven't worn yet.
I'm impressed. I'm really impressed. Okay, Jon, take care, my friend. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks for tuning into Insightful Inspiration, your trusted market research podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with your network, and we'd love it if you could leave a review or rating on Apple or Spotify. For more on this episode and others, head over to celesco.com. And remember, insight isn't just about what we uncover, it's how we let it shape our actions. Until next time, stay curious, be kind, and keep seeking inspiration. We'll see you soon.